Patrick.
Want to say a few things about ROS Edmonton?
Sure. Yeah.
So we're going to get started. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, no, we're
So for those of you who are new, ROS Edmonton is basically a group that are of people who are interested in robotics here in Edmonton, and we work with the robot operating system, which is where we get ROS from. And we're really looking to promote robotics here in the city, whether people are coming from industry or the university or hobbyists, that kind of stuff. We want to build out that kind of community. And we meet every month on the third Thursday of the month, 6:30 p.m. right here. And we've been going since January of this year. Tonight we have with us Joseph Modayil. Am I saying that correctly? Okay. Joseph has been a part of the recent reinforcement learning and artificial intelligence group here at the University of Alberta for a number of years now. 4 or 5, something like that. 5, 6. And before that, he was doing some robotics and artificial intelligence stuff down in Texas.
Yep.
Yeah. And we're about to lose him over the Atlantic. So we're really grateful to have him here tonight to kind of give us his perspective on AI and robotics. That sort of thing. So I'd like to take it away.
Thanks. So this is going to be a brief intro to artificial intelligence and robotics, and maybe touch on how it might be relevant for ROS, and maybe what people here might have some interest in, like how they connect and what you might want to do with it. The presentation is rather informal, so ask questions wherever you have questions. Yeah, you should take nothing that I say too seriously. Cool. So these are some sort of high-level points. The fields of AI and robotics are each growing more capable, and we're seeing a lot more stuff in the media about it these days than we have in, let's say, the past 20. And we're seeing a lot of exciting new technologies, and we're seeing a lot of fear-mongering, and there's really not a lot of certainty as to what's going to happen next, right? And, yeah, but that's because we don't really know what's going to happen next, right? But we do see these fields growing, and we do see them becoming much more capable, and actually the fields of AI and robotics are going to start interacting more strongly, and I think this will make them both more capable. The question in the back?
Could the audio level just be slightly increased?
Oh, okay. We'll see. I'm a soft speaker, but just tell me the hour. Okay, so final thing is, so I'm talking about AI and robotics, and each of these are like large fields, and I'm going to provide you a very narrow and selective slice of them. So you shouldn't take this as being all of robotics or all of AI, or even, it's not even a representative sample of robotics and AI. It's really the things that I'm really most interested in, and as such, it's not going to be impartial or complete in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so I'm assuming most of you don't have much of a history with AI and robotics, and so the bulk of this is just going to be a bit of history as told by some videos, mostly, of historical AI and robotics research. And then I'll get into a bit of what the current state is for modern AI and robots, which is sort of, it builds on this history, it builds on the history in interesting ways. And then the final two things that I'll just touch on is ROS as a way of intercommunicating and what this might mean for AI. And also, well, we already know that it's somewhat useful for robotics, but the links to AI are perhaps a little bit less clear, and maybe not so wild speculation about the future, or maybe it's wild speculation about the future. Okay. So the first thing is, since I've had to cover everything, and you might be interested in actually knowing what went on under this rubric of AI, I'm going to give you a reference. This book by Niels Nielsen, who's one of the early founders in the field, or mid-70s founders. He wrote this book called The Quest for Artificial Intelligence. And it's a really good historical overview of what went on decade by decade, research project by research project. And yeah, it's a fascinating history. And there's lots of good ideas which people explored in the past and then forgot about, and then we see echoes of them in recent and modern systems. So if you want to learn more about these various pieces, I'd recommend reading that book. Okay, so next, I wanted to give you a bit of a survey, and we'll do this first with some timelines and then with some videos. So we have robots and we have AI. Okay? And so in the 1950s, we were seeing these mechanical systems where people were wiring them up, and it's just a few very clever people. And this sort of grew out of work in cybernetics, which was just a little bit earlier to that, and was the start of, let's say, the first attempts at making neural network systems, learning about continuous dynamics, and so on. And then shortly after this, people switched to looking at symbolic systems, because they were growing frustrated with their perceived, what they could do with the neural nets at the time. And then shortly after going to symbols, people then started looking at logic, and using logic to formalize everything. Somewhere around the time, some people at SRI built a robot called Shaky. And Shaky was very informative for a lot of subsequent AI technologies, as I'll just sort of point to.
Sorry, what is SRI?
Oh, the Stanford Research Institute, or it was the Stanford Research Institute, and then they just renamed themselves to SRI. But it's a quasi-business, quasi-academic institute just outside of Stanford. Okay. But this was really informative, and actually Niels Nielsen, the person who wrote that book, was there, and he was instrumental in Shaky. Then in the late 70s, early 80s, people started looking at expert systems, building rules. There was a revival of neural nets in the mid-80s, so this was like neural nets version 2. People discovered Backdrop, had neural nets training themselves. And roughly at about the same time, we had the rise of reactive robots, where they sort of went away from using logic as a foundation of building intelligent systems, and said, well, maybe we could do everything just within the robot itself. So the robot would have no internal model of the world, or maybe limited amounts, depends on which paper you read. And then people started putting these ideas together. They started building hybrid systems. In the early 90s, we started seeing machine learning start to take off. So decision trees, SVMs for real learners. And then this rise in machine learning and the inference techniques led to both the autonomous vehicles. So in about 2004, we started to see the early form of autonomous cars in the DARPA Challenge, version 1. And then, or Urban Challenge, maybe it was called then. And then we saw a rise of probabilistic models in, let's say, early 2000s, mid-2000s. Recently, we've seen a lot of news and success with deep networks. So this is like the third iteration of the neural nets. And they're steadily getting more capable. And on the robot side, we see substantially more complex tasks being performed. So we've seen the Amazon picking challenge and the DARPA robotics competition, and I'll show you brief dead videos of some of that as well. And then there's this area of reinforcement learning, which is where I've been spending a lot of my time recently, where we're trying to build some better techniques for doing everything. Okay, so that's it as text. If you wanted to look at it as a timeline, sort of see how much activity is going on. Like in the 1950s, we had Elmer and Elsie, which were these simple robots. Then you had to wait like 2 decades to get to Shaky. Waited 15 years, and you get to reactive robots with Genghis. Maybe wait another 10 years or so, you start to see the museum robots, which led quickly to the Grand Challenge. We also started to see some of the commercial robots come out. So we had Aibo, Roomba, now maybe Roomba is perhaps everyone's familiar with. It's a little robot vacuum cleaners. This was a cute robot dog from Sony. This one replaced cute robot dog. We have the Robotics challenge. We saw, if you're in the academic world, there's these other robots like the PR2, very capable, very expensive robot. Kiva Robotic Systems, they were automating Amazon's factories, or they were bought out by Amazon. Baxter, the same people who did Aruba, Brooks's Reactor Robots Group, and Atlas, which was used in the DRC. So we're starting to see a lot more activity in the robotic space, and it's paralleling advances in AI. Right, so they're intertwined in rather strange ways. Okay, so this is like the big picture, and then I'll just start showing some videos of individual pieces.
So which one are the museum robots?
So the museum robots, this is like Minerva. This was coming from work by Wolfgang Berger in Germany, along with Sebastian Thrun. Then Sebastian moved to CMU. Maybe Minerva was the CMU version. There was an earlier version which was there. And so what they did was they deployed an autonomous museum tour robot, right, where the robot would give tours of the museum to children. And the key thing there was that the robot could stay localized in a map. So the whole mapping and localization, well, there was an academic paper in the mid-80s, and by this point they had it working well enough that they could do it with sonars indoors. By this point, the sensors had improved enough, and the algorithms had sort of stabilized so that they could start to do autonomous driving. Yeah, sorry, museum robots were like Minerva and such. Okay, so let's just start with videos. So cybernetics, I'm giving this a rather broad timeline between 1930s and 1960s. Might have actually started earlier. It actually continues on, but this might be sort of the activity where people were looking at the control of a continuous dynamical system with continuous inputs, outputs, and internal parameters. The person who's most strongly associated with this is Norbert Wiener, who wrote a book on cybernetics. Really comes from looking at this thing as a dynamical system, trying to see how do you control a complex dynamical system in terms of its inputs and outputs. How does it internally regulate? And really taking a continuous dynamical systems perspective on it. Right? And this led to, well, in the same vein, there's some famous algorithms. There's things like Perceptron, the adaptive linear learner, Adeline, Samuel's checker player, which basically was learning weights and playing checkers. But let's look at the robot. Oh no, no. How do I get it to play? Play! Play?
In a simple villa on the outskirts of Bristol lives Dr. Gray Walter, a neurologist, who makes robots as a hobby. They are small, and he doesn't dress them up to look like men. He calls them tortoises, and so cunningly have their insides been designed that they respond to the stimuli of light and touch in a completely lifelike manner. When light strikes the cell, driving and steering mechanism sends her hurrying towards it. If she brushes against any object in her path, contacts are operated that turn the steering away, and so automatically she takes avoiding action. one up on Elwyn. When her batteries begin to fail, she automatically runs home to her kennel for charging up, and in consequence can live a much gayer life.
Okay, so these robots were really quite cool. As a roboticist, I love this. But in some sense, they're simple dynamical systems, and everything was wired up by hand, right? Some smart person was going in there and saying, okay, if we do this and this and this is how we'll wire up the desired behavior from the system. They weren't learning. And as they tried to scale up these small neural nets, they ran into problems. They found that they couldn't make them learn. They didn't have good algorithms for making them learn, and like wiring them up by hand was too problematic to sort of scale up too far. Okay, and so the sort of disappointment led many people to say, well, okay, we're not going to worry about this continuous signals in the world. We're just going to focus on symbols. Right? And we'll just worry about human reasoning. Maybe that's enough. Okay, so what they said is, we'll make models of reasoning over discrete symbols as given by us. And then most people ignored the connections between the symbols that they were giving to the systems and how this would connect up with the continuous world in terms of the various signals. There's some exceptions to this, including qualitative reasoning, but that's for another time. I'll let this close up. So some of the main people that are associated with this are Marvin Minsky. Marvin Minsky is a fellow at MIT, an academic granddaddy, I guess. And he was like on the border. So his thesis was on the neural nets, and then he was part of this group which basically made the switch and argued for reasoning with symbolic systems. Okay? John McCarthy, another contemporary, who took the symbol system and actually pushed for logical inference much more deeply. He's the fellow behind Lisp, which was a computer language heavily intertwined with early AI systems. And then Alan Newell and Herb Simon at CMU pushed a lot for general problem solvers, and they stated the physical symbol system hypothesis, which is that a physical symbol system has the necessary and sufficient means for generating intelligent action. Basically, it's arguing that they didn't need to deal with the continuous world. Everything that we consider intelligence might be well thought out in terms of manipulating discrete symbols. Okay? And this changed the face of AI. People started looking at logic for reasoning. They made a general problem solver. People started looking at theorem proving, thinking of general human reasoning as theorem proving. And they had some notable successes, mostly when trying to model expert human reasoning. Right? Like, what would a college graduate do when he's solving a math puzzle?
Just some clarity. So symbols are what? They're just like putting labels on. That's a Joseph. That's a computer. That sort of thing.
It's saying that you didn't have to worry. You could have a word or a unit like GenSim 35. You wouldn't have to worry about what it really means. All you have to know is how to manipulate it, right? And so you can encode things like how to do arithmetic, how to do calculus, how to solve a monkeys and bananas problem, like, or the cannibals and the missionaries, right? To solve these logic problems.
Cannibals and the missionaries. You want to expand on that one?
It's a classic logic problem.
Okay.
You have 3 cannibals and 2 missionaries that need to cross a river, and if you have too many cannibals or too many missionaries, then someone gets eaten or someone gets converted.
The goat, the wolf, and the cabbage as well.
Okay.
Same idea, right?
Yeah. The participants change in the various systems. Okay, so this started in, let's say, the 60s. There was sort of this major push to change things. It got some early successes. And then one of the first successful robot connections from this. So actually, some of these people, like Minsky at the MIT AI lab, I think assigned vision as a summer project for like some grad students, saying like, oh, we'll just solve the connection between vision and these symbols over summer, and then it's a little bit harder. So, in terms of the actually stuff in the UK as well, like there was Freddy the Robot. The one that's had the greatest influence on this side of the ocean was Shaky the Robot, which connected symbolic models with perception and action. So the senses that were coming in through cameras, moving this robot, and reasoning. And this led to some things which are still quite prominent in AI research, and particularly in followings. So one thing is A-star search, which is an efficient and optimal search method for these graph search problems if you have a good heuristic. A-star search is used. Oh, actually, a good way to think about it is A-star search is the thing that does route finding in your maps. So when you use Google Maps and you say, how do I go from point A to point B, they're using some variant of A-star search and all these things. And also scripts, style planning, which you might not have encountered in daily life. But it's really foundational to AI planning in terms of how do you block things out. So, you also have a video of Shaky. Is this the video on the chat? Thank you. Yeah, let's read it. I think this is just the intro. So, this here is Shaky. And then I just split up little segments of the video so that you can see kind of how it behaves. Let's see, look here. Okay. So this is the sort of worlds that the gate is shaking where polyhedrons.
A route to an end goal location, not to the top here, circumventing obstacles that need to be.
Okay, and so Shaky was perceiving polyhedra because they were simplifying the world.
Plans by first computing whether any obstacles lie in a direct path. If so, points near the obstacle are set up as sub-goals. After Shaky computes a route, he traverses it to the goal.
Is this sped up, Joseph?
Another intermediate
I don't know, but I don't
action
think so.
pushes the named object, box 1 in this example, to a location specified by a pair of coordinates. A feature of the intermediate level action is their ability to recover from unforeseen accidents. Our gremlin, Charlie, symbolizes an agent of change unknown to Shaky. Shaky sensors tell him that the box has slipped off the push bar, but his cat whiskers tell him where the box is, so he can get behind it and resume pushing.
Okay, so here we see they've simplified down the world, right, into these sort of mathematical entities that you could sort of try and program a vision system to deal with. There's still going to be things which the robot doesn't have in its world models and has to be able to deal with, like what happens when the box moves or something unexpected happens, like the gremlin comes out of the woods and kicks your box away. And so again, this is entirely programmed. There's no real learning going on, but it's dealing with goals. It's reasoning with sub-goals. It's all hand-engineered, but it's more complicated in some ways than the tortoise because it is actually doing goal achievement, right? The tortoises are, in some sense, operating in a much simpler world, or with much simpler goals, is maybe a better way of saying it. Okay, so maybe here you can see,
Shown on the TV monitor.
this is the perception. Right, so simplified down to models.
Programs enhance the edges of the picture to produce a line representation on the cathode ray tube display. If Shaky's dead reckoning estimate of his position were correct, the outline of the corner would have looked like this. Shaky uses the new picture information to improve his estimate of his location. The intermediate level actions communicate directly with the executive program and indirectly with the vehicle. To summarize, intermediate level actions are pre-programmed to work on frequently encountered tasks They can recover from several types of errors and actions.
Okay. So we see perception, it's connecting slowly to actions. Maybe this one will give us.
And all of the needed actions are assembled into a plan to accomplish the goal.
Plans.
This chart shows the major components of the complete robot system. Now we'll watch Shaky solve some problems. In our first task for Shaky, we wanted to use this box to lock this door, starting from this position. The robot executive is capable of understanding a wide variety of English statements, questions, and commands. We can type Shaky's first task in English, which is translated into predicate calculus, the language used by Scripps. Scripps analyzes the task and produces a plan to solve it. Let's diagram the plan found by Scripps. First, Shaky plans to use the action go to D5 that will take him to the doorway. Then he will use the actions go through D5 and go to D3. Finally, he plans to use go through D3 and block D4 with box 1. After completing the plan, Shaky begins to execute it. He moves to the first doorway by using the action go to D5.
Okay, so we can see that it's capable of somewhat sophisticated inference over this graph of, or its model of the world. Right? And maybe surprisingly, maybe not, this is in some sense still the dominant paradigm in robotics, right? You make plans, you do a lot of computation, and then you execute a motion, right? And then you look at the world and say, how much has the world changed? Let's replan and get back to it. So here, what would happen is typically Shaky is moving for, or thinking for 15 minutes because computers were slow and everything was slow, and you know they're processing a TV image with these slow computers, and then it would move for maybe 30 seconds and do a little bit, and then basically do another 15 minutes of planning. So it was really like stop and go. Most of the time was spent on reasoning because, well, that's what most of the researchers were interested in. Okay. So I think this is at the end of a successful plan. Just pushing that block into the door. Slowly, very slowly moving. It says it's done.
When a task is completed, Shaky doesn't forget the plan he has generated. The form of this plan is remembered and stored away as a new action routine called macro1. Macro1 is a learned macro action that takes Shaky from one room to an intermediate room and into a third where he blocks a doorway. When macro1 is added to Shaky's action repertoire, a description of it is added to his model of actions, so the Scripps can use it in planning more complex tasks. Let's see how Shaky makes use of this new.
Okay, so the way that they looked at learning was something to be done at the very end. Once you've successfully done something, let's chunk it up into a smaller atomic unit, basically memorize it, increasing our repertoire of the things that we can do or know about, and basically speeding up the process on a subsequent trial, or using this as a subroutine. So it was heavily dominated by thinking, right, or reasoning over these abstractions. And the robots were slow, and this really irritated some people, right? Because they wanted robots that move fast, like these slow robots that sort of lumbered around weren't interesting. They didn't seem very intelligent. They didn't seem as intelligent as little bugs. And so Rod Brooks, inspired in part by the earlier work with Elmer and Elsie, proposed to do reactive robots. Robots which basically avoided having any internal models and symbols and all of the rest of it, and saying the world is its own best representation. Let's just have the robots react to the environment, at least to the extent possible. Okay? And then they made these sort of complicated, well, somewhat complicated little robots that would move, and they'd move quickly, right? And they'd be moving over obstacles, and they wouldn't even have models of the obstacles, right? They'd be like cockroaches. And this worked. So these things also weren't learning, but they were moving very, very quickly. Action was given a predominant status. And then they built more complex behaviors in a so-called subsumption architecture by building one behavior on top of another. Okay? And this is concurrent with like the second generation of training neural nets. This thing had no learning in it, learning, but this push towards moving robots, having robots that respond to the world, having basically minimal or representations or no representations, was sort of started in, or restarted in the mid-80s. And this led to things like the Roomba vacuum cleaner and a more recent incarnation with substantially more internal state.
In terms of batch propagation, refers to memory of previous actions.
So back propagation is a training technique for neural networks. So back propagation wasn't at all involved in, like these were two separate research endeavors. One was on training neural nets, but this was going on in the robotics side. And it was basically, both were reactions, these were in some sense both reactions to the symbolic, the prevailing symbolic approach to AI.
Right. So reactive robots had no back propagation.
Right.
Okay.
So reactive robots were all fixed behaviors that people were again coding by hand. Kind of like Walter Gray's, they were getting more advanced architectures because they were able to chain things better. They were doing everything on computers, right? They weren't using wires and transistors and resistors for everything. They were doing it for some, but this was one reaction to symbolic AI, backpropagation. Neural networks was basically a bunch of the guys who liked neural nets back in the 60s and 70s, sort of achieving a fairly important result in the 80s. And actually, but it was a bit slow. People got really excited and then got disappointed when they realized that it was slow to train even with existing computer systems in 1985, and they were comparing to the computer systems in the 1960s. Many of the algorithms today work much better with larger data sets, like in the sense that they get much better results. Okay. Next phase. I'm not sure if this video will actually play properly. Maybe not. But the museum robots were sort of the outward face of a major advance in algorithms, where they were able to make maps of the robot's environment using the robot sensors. So initially they were doing this with sonar sensors, and later on they were using LiDAR or laser rangefinder sensors, where you could take the sensor image and see, well, this is a probability distribution of what the world, or what I would see if the world looked this way, and this is a probability distribution of where I would be if I moved forward for one step. They were able to put this together with Bayesian inference to start simultaneously localizing in the map. Okay. They say simultaneously, but not important. Through these techniques, the robots were suddenly able to actually build a coherent model of the world, the static environment, and move within it, stay localized. And so this is what allowed the museum robots to basically visit the kiosks and say, this is where I am. And when a bunch of children surrounded them, they would be confused, right? So they were able to reason with the distributions just to a certain extent. Part of it was brought on by improvements in understanding how to do computational Bayesian inference. So things like particle filters were central to the earlier versions of this, and some Pullman filters. And advances of this led to things like Google autonomous car. So the next video is brief overview from one of the Google car people on that technology.
The hardware system really is the data we get from the laser. The 64-beam laser generates about 1.5 million lasers per second. It allows us to see all the way around the vehicle, and it allows us to get a fairly high density of points. So here you're looking at what that raw data looks like. So we're driving down some street here, we can pick out the vehicles, we pick out the tools. You see how the data decreases in density as we get farther away, just because of the angle vectors. Here's the desert, you see the nice thing.
So we can see that the sensors got so much better that it's fairly safe to use, and they can be fairly certain of where they are in the map.
We can generate very high resolution maps of the world. So here we are driving our vehicle on the road, collecting the intensity of the infrared sensitivity of the road, and using that to build a texture model of the world. We take so there's actually 4 types of data we build in this. So I talked about the intensity models. On the top right here, we have the elevation model. So every vehicle can drive the map ahead of time to about 11 centimeters resolution to shape the world. We use this in the perception system. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. In the bottom right, we have lane level maps of the world. We go through our data to extract where the car should be drive and use that as a guide for our control, and also for estimating the movement of other vehicles. In the bottom left, we have what we call a status map. This is a model.
So I'm not sure if you could hear all of that, but the essence is they're mapping the world to a crazy degree of resolution, hence we get things like Google Maps. They're using information from multiple sources, so they're using overhead imagery, they're using the LiDAR images, which they're sweeping through at a very fast rate to get really high density information about what's going on right around them. There's human annotation, and they can put this all together and get maps which provide like basically all the road information. Their LiDAR provides them immediate sensory information to say, like, does the model really match what I'm currently observing? Do I need to take safety and avoidance responses? And they can put them together and basically engineer an autonomous car that's apparently quite safe. Okay. Now I don't want to say that I've sort of been picking off these robot videos to sort of highlight some of the AI advances through imagery, but there's been plenty of advances which don't involve the robots. And if you want to look at AI and say, where does it come from? Like what's pushing the AI forward? We really have 3 prongs. One is reasoning, and this is often with human provided domain knowledge. One is learning from experience, and the third one is computation. So largely Moore's law. So if we were trying to run today's algorithms back in the 70s, we would have failed. Today's algorithms back in the 1980s, our learning algorithms would appear to do too well. And so many people sort of tried AI techniques a couple of decades back, and then they said, like, learning's not working, or reasoning's not working, and really computation changes the game, right? The more computation you have, you can do crazy things, like techniques that didn't work now work. Okay? One of the areas where computation has really been king is in games, and so there were advances in like basically making the world's best or solving these games. So backgammon, checkers, chess, and Go. Actually, all 3 of these have had. Actually, no. Checkers was basically solved at the U of A. Go, they made strong advances at the U of A. Poker and Atari are also, win here at the U of A, and Atari was made at the U of A, and people went elsewhere. Did a good job with it. Jeopardy was another prominent one, right? Jeopardy sort of makes these things in a good level because what did they do? They took large databases, structured databases of sentences and small facts, and they were able to do shallow inference on it, so that's the reasoning. But then they were able to also parse the question, more reasoning, but then the core, one of the cores, to actually getting the right answer was learning. So learning to say which inferences are useful, which are supporting facts, how do you actually come up with a good solution from this slew of tiny facts, okay? Now these are sort of the prominent newsworthy things, but on the commercial side, we've also seen many advances, right? And we often forget them, or they're in the background, so we're not really sure if they're AI at times, but they really are. So all of the online recommendations, when Netflix makes a recommendation, when Amazon makes a recommendation, that's AI. Fraud detection, that's AI. Web advertising, that's AI and some other things. Logistics and scheduling. Logistics and scheduling, someone said that DARPA's, sorry, I should rephrase. The American military has put a lot of money into AI research, and I think solving the logistics problems for one of the wars, in terms of moving troops and equipment around, they said save them enough money to basically justify all of their AI expenditures over the years. Right? So stuff happens in the background that we're not always aware of. Virtual assistants like Siri and being able to talk on your phone. GPS navigation, this one ties back to that A-star, being able to find your maps. Predictable alerts on your phone. It's learning about behavior. Voice recognition on cell phones. This has been like getting substantially better over the past few years because they're able to learn from these vast databases, vast data sets. Automated phone dialogues. If you get a flat tire in Edmonton and you call up AMA, you don't talk to a person, you talk to a voice that says, that basically schedules a person to come over to you. Right? This is massive. Data mining of customer databases. This is going on in the background, but they're all good. Not really involving robots. But, you know, why not talk about robots? So this year there have been two prominent challenges. One from DARPA, where a Korean team basically managed to navigate complex maze. This one's not showing it. Okay, we'll talk about the Amazon picking challenge. We had a couple of participants in the Amazon picking challenge. So the thing was, Amazon is not satisfied with just having Kiva robots move the shelves of goods around. They want robots that can be able to pick the right item from a box on a shelf and place it into an order box. Right? And it's somewhat challenging because you have some description of what you're supposed to pick up and which box it's in. Like the objects are all of different sizes. You have to move around a little bit. You have to put all of these pieces together. Mobile manipulation is still challenging. Do you have anything more to say on the picking challenge?
I guess it happened in Seattle about a month ago now. Camilo, Rome, and I were out there. Didn't do that well, but it was lots of fun, I guess. We could talk about it if you guys want after Joseph.
Cool. Let's see if I can get the driver to okay. So this is sped up by a factor of 4. I think this one's sped up by a factor of 10. So it took them about an hour to navigate a small course. This was, again, a couple of weeks back. A bunch of different robots competed in this, including this Atlas robot from Boston Dynamics. And this big dog that's running around in videos. Some people that did that. The Atlas robot. This is another robot, the Hugo. We modified it for the challenge so that it can roll around. But like these are challenging tasks at the research level, right? This is not something that you can get to work commercially. So a robot that drives a car or a little car, gets out of the car, goes through a door, turns and opens a valve. So this was inspired in part by the need to take care of the reactor shutdown in Japan. There were valves that had to be opened and closed, and it was radiation was leaking everywhere. Our robots aren't quite ready for that yet. Not by a long shot. But the challenge was to see, well, how many of these pieces actually fit together now?
Joseph, do you know how much of this was autonomous and how much of it was any of it autonomous? Or
so it's mostly teleoperated, right? Like it's basically teleoperated at the level of minor goals, like go pick up this thing or
okay.
or and sometimes like so there was a communication channel between the robot and the human operators, and then DARPA would selectively throttle that channel, so they'd make it noisy or they'd give little wipeouts so that if the robot relied entirely on teleoperation, it would either fail or fall or whatnot, or just be slower. The more autonomous it was, the faster you could run, the more reliably you could run. But it's still mostly teleoperated. Right? But like doing the grasps, you can't like say, move each finger just so. You need to say, I have a grasp, I'm going to apply it here, move this hand over here. And the operators are only using the robot sensory channels, right? So they're also information. So what else did it have to do? It had to like make a hole. It has to remove one of these plugs. Several of the big Atlas robots fell. This really scared people. Most of the robots survived. One of the robots, one of my friends, was at the Track Labs group, and I saw a little blurb that the Track Labs robot lost a bunch of fluid when it fell. So the robots still are not particularly robust. They don't survive so well. It's still trying to get this plug.
Just to clarify, when they did the plugging thing right here, there was no like a unplug command. It's more like they were operating it like a ring press.
Maybe one level up from one level of abstraction. Let's say move the hand to this position, grasp, and like see whether or not it's there, and then pull to succeed.
Oh,
right? So it's too hard to do. Like you can't do continuous control like you would with a control car. What you can do is give like one step up. Say move your hand to here, do a grasp, right?
Right.
But
So it's not actually taking it to like see.
it's probably not doing deep planning, right? And its understanding of the physics and whatnot is basically nil beyond its own body. Right? It's basically someone's telling it where to go, what to do.
Being funded by DARPA is the ultimate goal military applications.
So for this stuff, DARPA typically just tries to advance the state of the art. So DARPA wants to advance the state of the art. Right? DARPA's intent is for military applications eventually, like things that could help the American military. Most of the researchers involved in these things are, like particularly at the universities, they're not so interested in military applications, but these are sort of core problems for the field. Right? So how do you do mobile manipulation? How do you drive a car? Or like how do you build maps and navigate safely? Right? How robust are the solutions? So DARPA serves as a sort of melting pot of various things. And then some of it goes off, becomes more military, some of it stays on the academic side. There's concerns both ways. So some people refuse to take military funding, although it's a very small group. Okay.
Is there anyone who doesn't know who DARPA is, by the way?
I remember what the acronym stands for. Was it defense?
Defense Advanced Research
Project Agency.
Project Agency. Yeah. It changed. It became much more applications oriented. Let's say around the year 2000 started. They used to fund a lot more in the sky research. Maybe that'll come back. Researchers complain. But let's move on from that. So, just a smattering of things. I don't have videos for all of this or any of this, but I want to say, okay, we saw robots using human provided models. I want to say people are actually using bits and pieces of this, of learning and reasoning, some of the more modern techniques in their robots, and they're not quite as flashy, or at the popular newspaper level, right, or popular media. So, like, one cool thing was doing expert level control of a model helicopter. This was maybe about 10 years ago now. Someone else showed, okay, we can take a dynamics model of a car and add learning to that, and so actually learn how to power slide car into a parking spot. And you watch the videos of this, and it's pretty fun. Control of arms and mobile manipulation. So playing ping pong, or just learning to swing a bat and hit a ball properly, or play ball and you're trying to ball into a little cup. Making a pancake from a recipe. This is how scripted, more traditional AI. Synchronized control of multiple drones. Lots of people are interested in drones. This is like a mix of military and hobbyist interests. And then there's people doing small steps towards learning directly from this experience. Holy smokes, it's 7:30. Okay, so I'm going to skip my learning video. It's cute. We can have robots. This is our lab. This is one of my little robots. And it's like learning through that one symbol. And then you can avoid it. But let's skip that because it's 7:30. And, well, this part might go faster. Do we have any questions about the history?
Could you take maybe just a couple minutes to explain where University of Alberta fits in kind of globally in terms of AI and robotics?
So on the AI front,